Hello, and welcome to another episode of Never Go Against the Family. We're coming to you live from the University of Northern Iowa Family Business Center in Cedar Falls, Iowa. We follow family businesses and topics that help your family business sustain itself. Today, you're going to be introduced to Veronica Maldonado, who is part of the fourth generation of a family that impacted Venezuela's agricultural and industrial sectors. When the state disowned the family and took the ranch that for 100 years represented the heart of the family, most family members, including Veronica, left the country to gather in the United States. They began to rebuild, and together with her cousins and the support of the previous generation, they created a new beginning to continue the Maldonado legacy. Veronica currently serves as chair for the board of GEM, or Grupo Economico Maldonado, companies. Veronica is going to share her story and what she has learned about the family business along the way. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. Today I'm joined by Veronica Maldonado. She's a fourth generation owner of her family's company, and I'm going to let her explain a little bit more about that as we get into this. She is going to be our guest for our breakfast series coming up in March, along with Heidi Vermeer-Quist, to talk about governance and more importantly, though, how they've used governance and other things to just have more family communication, to keep family cohesiveness and togetherness. I think you'll hear from her story, especially when we get together in March, on just how complex and unique it is, and how, frankly, we should feel very lucky here of some of the things that we haven't had to deal with that Veronica's family has had to go through. And so, Veronica, I really appreciate your time so much. And if you could just kind of give us a little brief introduction on yourself and where you fit in your family-owned company.
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Wonderful. Yeah. So I come from a fourth generation family business. We started in Venezuela, right at the tip of South America. My great-grandfather was a doctor, and he was dedicated to finding cures, malaria, so on. At the time, Venezuela was still, we were still building our structures from having become independent from Spain, blah, 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 blah. And anyway, he, at some point, I guess somebody in the family must have told him, it's wonderful that you're this doctor, but you have a family to feed. And you have to start, what's going to be your business? How are you going to sustain this family? And so he decided to buy some land, and he started there, and he bought a big, at the time it was a feather. They exported feathers to Europe, and then he got cattle. And so then that's how my family started. And then when my grandfather came along, he continued expanding cattle. And then he got into other businesses to support actually the cattle business because he couldn't get financing. He was like, okay, how do I get financing? So they got into insurance and banking just to be able to support the agriculture. Okay. And then that ended up being like, oh, wow, this could be also real estate because some of the properties were closer to some growing cities. And so then it's like, well, why don't we go into real estate? So off into real estate they went. And then with his children, they were like, oh, wow, we have this, we have this land, we have this cattle. Well, what about dairy, orange juice production? Because that seems to kind of align. So then they went off, and with my uncles, they went off and got into the dairy juice business. And then they were five, and my father and his siblings, and then my aunt was like, well, this is, where do I find my place? And, she was a total trailblazer, and she made her own life and her own way in art. And she's quite recognized Latin American art collector, which is pretty awesome. Oh, wow. And then my generation came along, and then we had our own set of challenges with political turmoil, and we had to make some really, really horrendously difficult decisions, and we made those, and here we are today. But if you want to hear more, you have to listen to the panel.
Right, that's right, which will be a really interesting story, and I appreciate you sharing a little bit about it. So now you're a fourth generation owner and involved and living in the States now, I should have mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about how your family has used governance from, maybe a starting of when you didn't even know what that term probably meant? Because I'm sure there was a time where you weren't too up on what a family council was or any of those things or what they would have to deal with you guys and how you got started into those kinds of things. Was there a champion within your family that was pushing for that? How did that happen?
No, there's definitely was. So it happened, as sometimes happens with families. We had a series of events with my grandfather, and when his siblings were like, wow, if we don't do some planning, we're really going to be in trouble. So they decided to get organized way back when in the mid 90s. Um, After college, I went to Japan. So I was living in Tokyo at the time. I was working in Tokyo, so I really didn't know what was going on in the family business.
Mhm.
And then I would hear, oh, we're having these gatherings because we're getting organized and we might create some trust structures, or we're going to go and take some courses in Wharton because they have a program on family business. And we were all like, what? Because at the time you never, this was way back when. And then it's
Yep.
like, oh, well, first of all, we have to, this understanding that we were a family business and that we needed to organize ourselves. So absolutely, I think my family was very smart. My grandfather and his children, my father, one of my uncles, definitely champions of understanding what it meant to be a family business, what it meant to do transitions that were well organized. And they went about educating themselves, and they found a program at the time, like I mentioned, it was at Wharton. That's where we started,
Yeah.
kind of like basics, the whole family. Well, by the whole family, I mean my aunts and uncles and some of my cousins, the older cousins, they all went, and we started to understand what it meant to have proper governance, what governance was, ownership governance. And from there, they came out with kind of like a plan of how to organize themselves. And then they went about and looked for the best advisors, both in family business and then the legal advice and then the tax advice on how to set this up.
Mm-hmm.
And God bless them, they formed a small group of sort of a committee between some of the third generation and some of the olders of my cousins. And they put together a whole governance structure, which they immortalized in our family constitution. And so then we had a document that kind of like an umbrella kind of document that regulated how we would interact with each other, how we would do generational transitions, how we would operate. They created a family council. When later on in 2000s, then they were like, you know what, the family council needs to have some sort of executive body because it makes decisions, but then who executes them? We didn't want the company to execute them. This was independent of the company. The operating companies had their own structures. So
Yeah.
then it was like, well, why don't we create a family office? And that will be the executive arm of our family council, and all those issues that are shareholder issues that are not directly tied into any of the operating companies. And so that came about, and they brought me, after Tokyo, I went to New York, and I was living wonderful life in New York City. I was working there, and they were like, hey, Veronica, we have this plan, so why don't you come back? And I said, no. But then I was like, well, I went back and to set up this family office. And then from the family office, we continued to refine our structures. But we always went and got advice from experts and from people that knew. So yes, governance has played hugely important role in our family.
We originally said no.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I was living the life in New York City.
Okay. Okay. So you somehow then your dad or mom came back to you and coerced you.
Well, actually, it was really funny because my dad first started, and then my uncle called me, and he's like, "Well, the next time you're in Caracas, I'd like to meet with you." And so then I went to meet with him, and he's like, "Oh, and bring your resume, by the way." And I was like, "Okay," and he did like thorough interview. It was really funny. And then he said, "Well, we'd really think you could add value here. You have the experience we're looking for, and we'd like you to come home and
So,
work with
okay.
us on And then the real kicker, how my dad hooked me in was because I wanted to get my master's at the time. And he said, no, come back for 1 year and then you can go get your master's. Just help us with this a little bit.
Yeah.
And 17 years later, I did get my master's.
It's interesting that you mentioned, other branches of the tree kind of getting involved in interviewing you, recruiting, talking with you. Like,
Oh,
sometimes if
yeah.
it's just your own parents, I think it's easier to brush that off or whatever. And then when others from the family come calling, then it's like, okay, what's this all about type of thing. This must be more serious, or, I'm guessing there was some of that thought in your head maybe when it was your uncle talking with you.
Oh, looking back, of course, I'm like, that absolutely made a huge difference because, like I said, when I graduated college, I went to work in Japan. So fresh out of college, I get put into the Japanese training system. And as you know, the Japanese are incredibly, well, as you may know, the Japanese are
Mhm.
incredibly formal with their training, with their organizational structures. Like, so I came out of there very, okay, process oriented. This is how you do things. So,
Yep.
um, very, very, just very professionally, just thinking, in terms of just corporate thinking,
Kaizen.
Japanese at that. So,
Yep.
I guess when I went back and my uncle interviewed, I very much appreciated the seriousness and the formality in which he did it. He asked for my CV. He went through it point by point, asking me, okay, how do you think this experience is relevant to what we want to do? Explaining to me what they wanted to do. And he interviewed me 3 times, not once, 3. So when he said, you're the right person for the job, we'd like to hire you, I was like, God darn it, I earned this job.
Yeah. Yeah, holy smokes, man. He made you sweat.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was very, I very much appreciated my uncle. He's very formal, very organized, very serious. And I felt, wow, we have this leadership in the family. And
Okay.
definitely had a positive impact on me on saying, okay, I earned this job. This is serious. It's a real job. And sure enough, it was a very real job.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
And
again, I
maybe,
had come from, Japanese companies and then I worked in US companies. So I had seen like how Japanese corporations worked, how US corporations worked, and I resonated with that type of environment.
Mhm.
And so I I was when my uncle was quite professional, I was like, okay, this works for me. I was reporting to him anyway.
Okay, so maybe a part of you was thinking your family business wasn't gonna be as sophisticated or as formally structured, whatever, as some of the other environments that you were thriving in at the time. And so,
Probably.
okay, okay. Can you,
Well, also because, sorry, but it's also because the way I related to my family was in the farms. I spent all summers running around and, seeing my father in, running farms and this and that. So I had never really seen the corporate side of it. I had only seen the
okay,
I'm dirty, because I stepped in cow dung and
yeah,
we're trying to get the calf to be born and, go over there. So it was just a different side that I saw.
sure.
And also, I would have
Important to see
never
both.
reported to my dad or worked with my dad.
Okay. Oh, that's a cool story. I appreciate you sharing that, and kind of helps maybe others think about how they might approach their next generation, and remembering it doesn't just have to be parent to child, aunts and uncles playing a role in that as well. Probably goes a long way. So okay, so the other big part of what we're talking about with the panel in March is going to be about communication and using governance as a tool for that communication. I'm wondering, how as you've especially your third and fourth generation since the mid '90s to now, have which is a lot of time to cover, but is has family harmony only increased because of this type of thing? And would you say, would you have, I don't know, suggested thoughts to other families on where to start with some of that stuff?
Regarding the communication,
Yeah,
on our governance structures, you mean,
yeah,
or? Well,
yeah,
one of the
like,
things, hmm?
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, exactly.
One of the things that I think was really was beneficial for my family was that when they started the governance process, they were very inclusive of all the family members, like the siblings, all the siblings participated. They created a family council where they all participated. They took minutes that we could all read. Even though some of the members of the fourth generation were not formal members of the family council. If they requested permission to participate or sit in just to listen in, they could
Yeah,
do so. So I think this communication that they knew when we established the family office, they also knew that there was a place they could go to ask questions. There was a place they could reach my uncle or any of our, my father or my aunt to ask questions. So I think that was definitely very helpful.
okay,
Having said that, we are a South American agriculture cattle ranching family with very strong characters. So we are
okay,
not without a good, we love to argue.
sure.
Uh,
Yeah. I mean,
but I
that,
think that was definitely something, I think that was definitely something that I think families is really important to err on the side of being more inclusive when it
okay,
comes to communication processes and being more open and transparent, I think is absolutely key um, as to what they're doing, how they're doing it, what could be possible roles, what if you want to fulfill a role, what are the conditions to fulfill the role, how did that come about? That that people understand what is the family is trying to do, why they're trying to do it, where they can participate, how they can or cannot be involved. Also, the message that if you choose not to be involved, it doesn't mean that you're not a family member. Of course, you'll always be a family member. You're not obligated, but
sure,
that the door is open to ask questions, to understand.
okay. I mean, I appreciate you making the point too of including younger family members. It sounds like even before they're able to maybe contribute, but to get them at least aware and exposed to the conversations and topics and ways at which you do communicate and do business as a family. Let's see here. Maybe one other thing along with that, is if you could share, just real quick, and then we'll close, but I'm guessing you have a fifth generation coming in at some point, and you know, are there ways that you're using governance or, um, policies or anything like that to kind of help give them a structured way into seeing what's going on with the company and getting a better exposure to things, that way?
Yes, I think to be super honest, that other families have probably done it better than us because in our case, we created a next generation committee, we created all these next gen programs. But because my family left Venezuela, my fifth generation's all over the place. I have family members in Thailand, we had for a while in South Africa, we have Germany, and for a while we had in Guatemala, we have in the Dominican Republic, we have them in Spain. We have family members of my fifth everywhere. And so they didn't grow up with, for example, how my cousins and I grew up, where we were all in the same country, we all went to the same farms, we all went to the same events. So we've struggled to figure out how to bring all of that together. Um, in a way that they feel connected, that they understand that there's a place. And on top of it, we also see that in this generational transition, the way that we did business, like again, we're in land, manufacturing, and a lot of the things that they're currently interested is not land or manufacturing. They're interested in a whole bunch of other topics that for us, we're like, oh, okay, how do we bring that together? How do we make space? And those are conversations we're currently having now, and they've been really challenging.
Sure. Okay. But
Yep. But
because
of
you,
course, there's mechanisms, programs of bringing family together. There's like huge shareholder groups that have yearly gatherings where they bring everyone together. But I think for me, one of my biggest learnings is that we have to be willing, one, to figure it out and to hear the voices of the next generation as to how they fit in. Sometimes I think, well, maybe we were a little rigid in not understanding them, because we come, again, like I said, we come from a certain thought process, right? And looking back, I'm like, oh, wouldn't it have benefited us if we would have been a little bit more flexible in hearing them as to what their interests were and how we could also work with them instead of having them try to adapt to what we were already doing.
sure.
So that is some of my personal reflections. And also in understanding that when you have a large fifth generation and when your families are growing, it requires intention to get the family together. And when you get the family together, purpose as to why we're getting together. And to really think of those intentions and then to invest money in it. It's expensive. It's expensive to get people together, put a program together. But if you are thinking long-term and you're thinking multi-generationally, it's really worth your time and money to find ways of how to invest in that cohesion and that togetherness and find plans. Either it's a yearly gathering, it's, whatever it is that works for your family. But that takes time, that takes money, that takes intentionality, and
Yeah.
it takes like an awareness of we need to do this. It might not be urgent, but it's hugely important.
I'm writing that down because I feel like that's a thing that can be a struggle point is if it's not urgent, it doesn't often get attention, at
Exactly.
society. But the problem becomes once it is urgent, then maybe our options are more limited or we're
Or
acting
it's too late.
emotional, yep, or it's too dang late. Exactly. And I appreciate you mentioning that.
Or that ship has sailed.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Where were you? Yeah, 2 years ago or whatever from a standpoint of when that could have been done. I appreciate you mentioning that. I think I'll end with that, because I think we'll expand upon that during the panel.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Never Go Against the Family, a podcast produced by the University of Northern Iowa Family Business Center. You can find more information about the center, membership, and upcoming events at unifamilybusinesscenter.com. As Vito Corleone advises, never go against the family.